I think we'll start. Thank you for your patience. We did not realize we knew we would be competing against football. We didn't realize we were also competing against movie stars. So thank you all for moving away from your screen to join us today. I'm Steve Ross. I am the Myron and Marion Casden Director of the Casden Institute for the Study of the Jewish Role in American Life. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you today to our Casden conversation featuring Lacey Schwartz, Rabbi Sharon Brous, and Professor Bruce Phillips, who are going to be talking to us today or in conversation about race and inclusivity in the American Jewish community, challenges and opportunities. Before hearing about today's speaker, I wanted to thank ICAR Los Angeles for partnering with us in producing today's event. ICAR, for those of you not familiar, is a wonderful Jewish organization that works to reanimate Jewish life by helping Jews decipher what it means to be human in today's world. I'd also just very briefly like to, for those of you who are joining us perhaps for the first time, describe what we do at the Casden Institute. We take great pride in holding 3 endowed lectures which cover a wide range of topics on Jewish political life to Jewish scholarly and artistic contributions across America. And our Casden Conversation series, which is a more informal Sunday afternoon series, brings together what we hope will be engaging discussions and conversations that illuminate a wide variety of contemporary issues that are at the forefront of American culture and Jewish identity. I'd also like to draw attention to our annual Burton Lewis Lecture that will take place here Sunday, March 25th in this location in partnership with ICAR, Los Angeles, and the Jewish Community Foundation. And the event will feature that wonderful speaker, me, in conversation with someone who you really should come to hear, Stephen Smith, who's the executive director of the Shoah Foundation. And we're going to be talking about my new book, Hitler in Los Angeles, How Jews Foiled Nazi Plots Against Hollywood and America. If you're on our mailing list, if you're not on our mailing list, please sign up. We've got a copy out in the hallway. We do not sell our mailing list. We do not give our mailing list away. So if you're on our mailing list, the only ones you're going to hear from are us. I'd love to introduce our speakers now. Lacey Schwartz is a film and television director and producer who has worked with a variety of networks and production companies on branded feature-length documentaries, on branded entertainment programs, scripted and reality TV series, commercials, feature-length documentaries, and narrative films. And currently she is producing and directing Outside the Box, a documentary in which Lacey traces upbringings in a white Jewish family, her discovery at age 18 that her biological father is black, and her personal experience and exploration of her mixed race identity, all while exploring her connection to other black Jews in America. Lacey graduated from Georgetown University in 1998 with a BA in government and a minor in studio arts, and received her JD from Harvard Law School in 2003, where she wrote, directed, and edited and produced her first 2 films, Schwarze, 2002, a short autobiographical film, and Legally Black, Brown, Yellow, and Red, a featured documentary on minority experiences at Harvard Law School. And before her career in television and film production, Lacey worked in a corporate civil rights and entertainment law, in addition to serving as a New York City public school teacher, teaching math and theater. Please welcome Lacey Schwartz. And in the middle is Rabbi Sharon Brous, a leading voice in reanimating Jewish religious life in America and working to develop a spiritual roadmap for a soulful, multi-faith justice work in LA and across the country. Rabbi Brous is senior and founding director of ECAR, which started in 2004, and has become a model for Jewish revitalization in the United States and beyond. Her TED Talk, entitled Reclaiming Religion, has been translated into 14 languages. In 2013, she blessed former President Obama and Vice President Biden at the inaugural National Prayer Service, and in 2017, she spoke at the Women's March in Washington, D.C. Rabbi Brous was also named #1 on the Newsweek list for the most influential rabbis in America. Please welcome Rabbi Sharon Brous. And finally, Bruce Phillips is professor of sociology and Jewish communal services at Hebrew Union College and the Jewish Institute of Religion, Los Angeles. Professor Phillips has been among the leading researchers in the sociology of American Jewry for over 3 decades. He served on the National Technical Advisory Committee for the 1990 and 2000 National Jewish Population Surveys, and he advised the recent Pew study on Jewish attitudes. In addition, he's conducted local Jewish population surveys in Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Denver, Phoenix, Chicago, Milwaukee, Houston. If you want to know about Jewish demographics, he's the guy you want to talk to. Bruce also published works on a wide variety of topics, from Iranians and Israelis in the United States to Jewish suburbanization, Jewish education, the economics of Jewish life, and Jews in Los Angeles. His current research projects include studies of the impact of migration and community size on Jewish affiliations of new migrants, multiracial studies as a lens for understanding Jews of mixed parentage, and applying the work of economists to understanding intermarriage, as well as a historical study of race and place in LA from 1920 to 1930. In addition to his HUC position, he is a senior research fellow at the USC Center for Religion and Civic Culture, where he's conducting research on religion in California. Please welcome Bruce Phillips. So just to tell you our format today, we're going to have our speakers in conversation for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to all of you for Q&A for about another 20, 25 minutes. But before we get going, I would ask you to reach into your pockets or your purses and turn off or silence the cell phones. I ask that, and somebody is going to forget, and then it will ring in the middle. It is disruptive to the speakers. So, without further ado, I invite our 3 distinguished panelists to begin their conversation on race and inclusivity in the American Jewish community, challenges and opportunities. Thank you.
I'm going to kind of set the scene with some numbers, even if you didn't want to ask me about Jewish demographics. A couple of years ago, my friend and colleague, Bruce Haynes at UC Davis, has sent me a manuscript for a book he's doing on Black Jews. And he said, do you have any numbers for me? I want to put some numbers in the introduction. So I spent many weeks trying to work with available data. And here's what I came up with, just to sort of set the scene for, it's intrinsically important conversation, but it's also demographically a very important conversation. Both the 2000 National Jewish Population Survey and the 2013, the famous Pew Jewish Americans study included questions on race. So in the 2000 study, I found that 6% of Jewish households in which the respondent was born before 1946 contained a Jewish person of color. as compared with 17% of the households in which the respondent was born after 1965. In the Pew study conducted 13 years later, I found that just over 20% of millennials and Gen Xers were Hispanic, Asian, African American, mixed race, or something else. So in other words, close to 1 out of 5 younger Jews is a person of color. I also have a personal connection to this topic. 2 of them, and neither of them, both of them are kind of painful. First is my friend and colleague Gary Tobin, one of the founders of the Chol HaShon, for whom Lacey works. And we lost him a couple of years ago, way too young, and with so much yet to offer. So I'm always happy to take an opportunity to remember Gary. He was a pioneer in so many areas, including this one. The other personal connection is a good friend of mine from college who had a Jewish mother, a black father, attended an Orthodox Jewish day school all the way through 12th grade. And when my second year of college, I was taking Hebrew 10. We had like a month-long unit on Talmud, and I was like totally lost. I could not understand any of it. I had no idea what it was about. So I used to bug my friend, and you'll see why I don't name him in a moment, for help. So, a couple times a week, I'd go to his dorm room, and he would sit down with me for a half hour and say, Rabbi Akiba's saying this, and Rabbi Hillel saying this, and this is what's going on. And if you weren't Reform, you'd know all this. So in his senior year, he handed me his senior honors thesis and said, I want you to read this. It was in the form, this is long before Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote a letter to his son. My friend wrote a letter to his younger brother in which he explained, Jews will never accept you as a black person. So forget it now, save yourself the heartache. About 20 years ago, I just happened to meet somebody who knew him from his old days in Orthodox Jewish day school, told me how to contact him, or gave me some ideas. I looked him up. I tracked him down. He had become an ordained Baptist minister, and he said, it made it clear he really didn't want to have any association with his old friends from Jewish friends, or even to be identified publicly as Jewish in any way. But it turns out he teaches at a really distinguished theological seminary as a professor of what else? Hebrew Bible. And he is, someone told me, he's one of the most well-known and well-regarded Christian scholars of the Hebrew Bible. I, didn't say anything, but clearly that Jewish education served him well, albeit in a different faith. And I imagine his experience was not unique, and so I want to use that to begin the conversation with our 2 very distinguished and very interesting guests. So Lacey, first, could you tell us a little about the Chol HaShon and what you do as National Director of Outreach? And Sharon, I'd like you to just tell people who don't know a little bit about ICAR and how ICAR intersects with our topic.
Sure. Hi, thank you so much for having me. So the Chol HaShon is an organization that is based out of San Francisco, although we operate throughout the country and globally as well. But it works around racial, ethnic, and cultural diversity and inclusivity in the Jewish community. And we do that in a variety of different spaces through leadership, community, education primarily. And so as we said before, a lot of what we did started around research fundamentally, because it came out of Gary's work where, like many things that we did, it really came out of really doing focus groups and doing research around what people's experiences were. And a lot, in particular, the inspiration for it was that Gary and Diane had adopted a black son and really felt like conflicted about, very apropos to your story, very conflicted about how he was going to be able to grow up in the Jewish community and whether or not it would be welcoming to him, and really wanted to do work around that. And kind of so the organization started off as a research project and then realized how much the need was there. And so for me personally, I've been involved with the organization for over 10 years on a variety of different levels. Actually initially connected with them through Rachel Levin. Righteous Persons was actually the person who, when I first started working on a personal documentary about my own personal story, which just by the way, that bio I think was like really old. So the film actually that came out in 2014 is called Little White Lie. And so I was starting work on this film, and Rachel was very supportive and said, you really have to sit down and connect with Gary and Diane. And it for me, opened it up into doing larger work, because at the time, and I still do a lot of film. I still do film and TV production, direction, and writing. But really, for me, what I do is also impact filmmaking, and really about how do you kind of take the media and use it to do good in so many of the different spaces in which I work, and that there is need. And so in particular within the Jewish community, I was really, really excited and impressed by the work that they were doing at Behola Shon, and really kind of that was like the beginning of a very long partnership for me, where I've done over the years more programmatic work and now do more strategic work and kind of broader picture thinking around the work we're doing and how to bring it out. And we've been, doing this work. It's going to be 18 years this year now. And for us, it's also taking a lot of that and figuring out how to spread it, how to develop tools for other people to be able to do that work, whether or not it's in day schools or community centers and all sorts of different places.
I just want to give a plug for her film, which used to be on the PBS website. I think now you can get it from Amazon.
That's true.
I've used it in a couple of my SC classes, one on intermarriage in general, where we have a unit on mixed race, and in my course on blacks and Jews. And universally, the students, I have to help them lift their jaws up off the ground after they watch it. It's a great film. It's really well done. And it's pretty amazing. And now I can show off and say, well, I know the filmmaker.
Okay, a word about ICAR.
Yes.
So ICAR started in the spring of 2004 when I was lucky enough to be introduced by Daniel Sokach, who now runs the New Israel Fund, to Melissa Balban and Adam Wergelis, who sit here in the front row today. And at the time, Melissa was one of the deans of the law school here at USC. And I was a young rabbi, relocated from New York here in Los Angeles, and really desperately trying to find a community where I could feel both spiritually enriched, intellectually challenged, and proud to raise children. And in my search for a community, I noticed that, first of all, there was an entire generation that was missing when you would go into most Jewish institutional spaces, which was a generation of people my age, 20s, 30s, 40s. And I also felt that we were in a particular moment in history in the early 2000s, post 9/11, war in Iraq, Abu Ghraib. There was war and terror and extremism, hatred, violence, human cruelties, and I really felt that there was a disconnect between where the established Jewish community was engaging most of its discourse and what was actually happening in the world, and I wonder if those two things are in fact related to one another. In other words, if we were to create a space where we could have conversations about what the great moral challenges of the day were, where we could speak really honestly about those things, I wonder if young Jews would be attracted to it and interested in engaging. And so with Melissa and Adam and a small number of founders, we actually launched the community. It was kind of it wasn't one of those things where we spent 3 years making a business plan and raising money and then launched, but instead just kind of dove into this conversation because we had we wrote out a mission statement shortly after meeting one another, which we sent out to a number of people to see if they were interested. And this later became my TED Talk 13 years later. So I think I was on the right track that night when we wrote it, but it was just some ideas about what it meant in a time when the dominant face of religion on the public stage is extremism and violence on one hand, that our religious institutions are so disconnected from the contemporary reality, and what would it mean to reclaim a space where there's a kind of feverish connection to, and deep and profound connection to, our religious life, but not in a way that leads us to hatred and violence, but instead leads us to love and forgiveness. And what would it mean to reclaim that kind of prophetic space in religious life? And we put this note out to to friends and family. And as legend has it, and also the true story is, 135 people showed up for our first gathering, and we felt like it was worth really, really exploring and engaging. So over the course of the last 13, almost 14 years, we've developed a community that is that's rich and diverse. And the idea that was born in this small group of founders has now manifested in a much more beautiful way than I think any of us could have imagined. And we really feel like our task, which in many ways we set out to rethink. It was incredibly audacious. I recognize that. But really, we wanted to rethink what Jewish ritual and tradition could look like in a community of people who ranged from Shomer Shabbat, religiously observant, to very marginalized Jews. We wanted for this to be a place that would be truly inclusive of Jews who look different from one another and think differently from one another, of people who have different kinds of family makeup than you would normally find in a typical, say, conservative synagogue or even Reform synagogue. We wanted to be able to have conversations about what's really at stake in the Jewish community and in the world today. And what does it mean to be a Jew and a human being alive in the world today? So it's been an incredible journey, and I'm especially excited to talk about this topic because I feel, as I think we would all agree on this. This is such an essential conversation, and one that for too many years we have not been having in the Jewish community. So I'm thrilled and honored to be a part of it, and grateful to all of you for making the time for it today.
So. I hear many painful stories from persons who are Jews of color. I have a friend who always has to explain that she's not from Ethiopia. An African-American informant in qualitative research I'm doing on people who grew up in interfaith families is tired of explaining that, yes, she grew up Jewish, she had a bat mitzvah, she's not a convert, she does know about Judaism and so forth. So I was wondering what kinds of painful stories, or hopefully happy stories, both of you have run across in your careers in communal, professional, and rabbi. Cheryl, why don't you start?
Sure. So in my own journey into Jewish and religious life, and I grew up as a Jew in Short Hills, New Jersey, so a suburban Ashkenazi Jew. And when I went to college and decided that I was interested in exploring my Judaism a little bit more, I really felt that everywhere I went, there was a door being slammed in my face because I was Jewishly illiterate, because I didn't know who Hillel and Shammai were, because I didn't know that at the end of Lecha Dodi, everybody stands up and turns around toward the door that I was walking in and wondered why they were all, staring at me, because there is a kind of code of engagement in the Jewish community, and if you don't know it, if it's not innate for you, you feel like an outsider. Now, again, I was an Ashkenazi Jew by birth, and I had grown up strongly identified Jewishly. I have a dear friend who came out to Los Angeles before ICAR started, and she would come to me crying, telling stories about how she, as an Ashkenazi Jew, would go to services, but because she was single, she would never get a Shabbos lunch invitation, and she would go to communities where everybody got a Shabbos lunch invitation as long as you're partnered. And the moment she started dating someone and they got engaged, she never had Shabbos lunch alone again. So if you think about the way that I wanted to start from this place because we do have a problem in our community with welcoming and with inclusion. Now, that I think is increased exponentially when someone doesn't look like the dominant Ashkenazi image of what a Jew in the United States is imagined to be. It's obviously very different in Israel, where there's, I think, much more diversity, and it is assumed to be in Israel. But in the United States, for Jews who do not look like their ancestors come from Europe, they are very often treated like outsiders, and many of you in this room have had this experience. And I And I've heard from and spoken with and listened to many. These are Black Jews. These are Latino Jews. These are Jews from the Philippines. Jews from Asian American Jews. Jews from around the world who are not Ashkenazi, and when they walk into any Jewish space, people sometimes, with the best of intentions, treat them like, this is not your home. We welcome you as our guest, when the message really should be, welcome home. Like it ought to be for anybody who walks into Jewish space. So we have a problem in the Jewish community. That it's a tribal problem. It's one of our great strengths. On one hand, which is I remember when there were 13 Iranian Jews who had been arrested years ago, and the whole Jewish community was just shattered by this. What do we do about these 13 Iranian Jews in Iran? On one hand, there's this sense of Jewish peoplehood that somehow in our romantic days we imagine that we're all connected to one another. But the downside of this is that those who are not seen as part of the immediate tribe, even if they actually are, but are not perceived to be, are treated like outsiders and like others. And I think it's extremely painful for many people of color who have that experience when they try to enter into spaces that should be their own spaces. I mean, we can go into greater depth here, but I want to give Lacey a chance to address.
Yeah, I mean, your thoughts completely echo mine. Although I don't think Israel's perfect in these spaces either. It's a larger conversation. But I would say that, to me, one of the biggest questions, like a lot of the ways that I know that, I approach work, and I know from an organizational place we approach, is that so many, and I think I love the way you talked about it, is that so many people are experiencing this, of feeling like they're outsiders, or feeling like even if they feel like there's a piece of them that isn't, kind of could make them an insider, that when they walk through the door, they have to leave a piece of themselves behind. And so for many people, I would say especially young people who have multiple identities that they're dealing with, and not necessarily always prioritizing one over another in the way that maybe used to be, that they are feeling like when they're walking into a Jewish space, they have to leave a piece of themselves behind. And I know I like to approach the work from a pretty empathetic way of looking at this, because rather than kind of fundamentally, we have an issue where, and I've been doing this for a long time, where we're still somehow or another, a lot of times in this educational phase, like that populations of people even still exist. And that because of the education of who we are as Jews is so ingrained through the institutions, that we're still actually educating ourselves about the true history and kind of where different groups of people come from, versus actually being in a place to push ourselves to understand that actually we have a very everybody kind of comes from an insular point of view, and it is up to us to educate ourselves about other. And for me personally, that was my experience, because I grew up in a white Jewish Ashkenazi family, and because I found out later in life that my biological father was Black, that for me there was an internal reckoning of those two identities that felt very opposed, that I had grown up believing that being Jewish was synonymous with being white. And I know we're going to get into that discussion a little bit more later, but just this idea that coming to terms with my own identity of being Black and Jewish, and how do you reconcile those two things together, and really actually not even having the knowledge to understand my own identity. And I think so many of us come in with like our own insecurities, our own lack of personal understanding of ourselves and our own stories, and then so instead we kind of project on others of what is right or wrong. And so I went through a big process for myself of really, in particular, I had this one experience where I had met somebody who, just by kind of visibly looking at them, I could tell that they weren't like, unlike I have a white Jewish mother, it kind of falls within people's understandings of even kind of old school understandings of what it is to be Jewish. And but I met somebody who clearly had two Black parents, and he was talking about his grandfather being Jewish, and I was literally sitting there thinking, how is that possible? But because I had been questioned so much my whole life about myself being Jewish, that I literally walked out of that situation and didn't ask any questions, and didn't actually have any more information, and took that as a kind of my own task, my own moment of accountability to go forward and educate myself. And it was really what actually like spun me into like really doing this work, is that idea of recognizing the fact that I was in a place of ignorance and lacking knowledge. And so what was my duty to kind of understand how different people exist? If like the world had taught me that certain groups don't exist, how do I take it upon myself to in fact inform myself otherwise? And I think that was really what was a huge piece of the journey for me, which is, and that's the way I always look at this, is like, of course, there's a lot of different people with a lot of different experiences. It's incredible to me, not only in the Jewish community, but in general, how few people feel like they quote unquote belong in spaces. Often many people feel like they don't belong. And if we really kind of dig into why that is and how do we get past that, really to me, it's about this idea of just norms and how we are reinforcing all the time, even subconsciously, this idea of, that certain people are normal, that there are certain existences that are right, and that other experiences are in fact stigmatized in a lot of different ways. And I'm again empathetic to it, especially in the Jewish community, because I understand why. There's fear in the Jewish community. Obviously, I understand why we bond over what we have in common. It is comforting. It makes us feel good. It makes us understand what to expect. So how do we get to a point where we can have that we can meet somebody and say, oh, you're Jewish, that is comforting for me, but we can also celebrate difference without making people feel ostracized?
Could you just, and here I'm asking for my sociological field notes. You mentioned that Jews of color have to leave a piece of themselves behind when they come in the door.
Well, I was saying that about everybody. In particular, I was speaking about young people, but yeah.
Great, okay. So actually, that's a good segue to my next question for both of you, is that I guess about 30 years ago, Lydia Kukoff, who sort of coined the term Jews by choice, was fighting sort of similar struggles for recognition and authenticity of people who converted to Judaism, who are also having this experience of being kind of a marginalized, the other, even though they're part of the group. So I was wondering, it sounds like listening to Sharon that both of you kind of look at this as part of a larger problem of inclusivity, and I was wondering how Jews of color fit in, and in fact, people who are concerned with inclusivity, what can they learn from Jews, the experience of Jews of color, and the experience from people who work with Jews of color, and if in your own work, the whole Jews by choice movement had any influence on you, or was it way before your time and sort of almost taken for granted? It's either one.
Yeah, you can go.
So, well, I want to think for a moment about other groups that often feel not fully welcome in Jewish spaces as maybe a way of attacking this question. Divorced Jews, right? Elderly Jews who feel like they're not all the funding's going to bring in young people. Young Jews who feel like all the people in the room are old, and LGBTQ Jews. We've had this conversation in our community recently where somebody said, that Jewish communities have become very inclusive now of LGBTQ Jews, but yet that kind of inclusivity has not yet really reached the Jews of color. That there's a way in which there was a shift in the last few years, and it became incredibly important for people to make accessible bathrooms for transgender Jews who are coming into service, or non-Jews who are coming to services. The recognition in the way that we use language when we call people up to the Torah. This is very new, but it's pretty widespread. There's a lot of attention that's being paid to this right now, and I think that there's a lot of effort being made in this area. And there's a sense that level of sensitivity and awareness has not yet been brought to the question of Jews of color and people of color generally. And I will just put this out and tell me if I'm going in a direction that you want to save for later or don't want to go to. But I suspect that part of the problem is that many Ashkenazi Jews don't see ourselves as white. And so it's very awkward to identify white and non-white Jews or white and black Jews because we don't identify the whiteness as part of our own identity. And so I know that I'm sure you've spent a lot of time writing about this, so I feel uncomfortable even sharing my own take on it or theory on it, so please jump in. But I will just say, my sense is that when Jews, growing up, I have always checked other on those sheets, when we have to write what our race is, because white, that's not me. Those were slave owners in the South. Like, my people were getting chased by, Cossacks. Like, that's not my history. And I think there's been a kind of growing awareness in the last decade, in particular, for many white Jews or white-looking Jews, that even though we might not see ourselves as white, we're seen by the world as white, we're seen by the police as white, we're seen, when we're going in for a job, when we put in a job application, we're seen as white. So in some ways, we might not identify as white, but we still are the beneficiaries of white privilege. And so I think this is a conversation that's starting to happen in the Jewish community, but not yet fully formed. And as a result, because of perhaps our own ambivalence around whiteness, we haven't fully tackled the question of what does it mean to be a Black Jew? Should we even be calling people who are Black and Jewish Black Jews? There was an article written a couple days ago, some of you might have seen in the foreword, by a woman who said, "Stop calling me a Black Jew." Right? And, you don't go out there and say, "Hi, I'm a white Jew. Nice to meet you. Why should I have to identify myself as a Black Jew?" I know other people who are very proud to call themselves Black Jews. So I think that we're just starting to enter this conversation, and it's very awkward because even the dominant Ashkenazi white-looking Jews don't necessarily know how we relate to our own kind of racial identity, struggling and wrestling with the idea of race as a social construct, and it's not real anyway. So why are we placing these words on our own identity? Why don't we just create inclusive spaces that can take us all in? And why don't we pretend that we can be colorblind? I mean, I think there are all these sort of bits of conversation that are starting to surface, and we're not there yet. Like, we sort of don't have the tools, which is why I think the work of B'chol Lashon is so critical right now, because somebody needs to kind of help our community have a conversation that we are ill-equipped to have in this moment.
Yeah, I just going off of what Sharon said, less than remembering the question, but I completely agree, and I think I would even take it further, because I think when I look at a lot of this work, and obviously the idea of, like, people talk about racism or talking about doing like racial justice work, which I think is very, the idea of racial justice work is like a very comfortable space for the Jewish community because we have a history of it. There is, but there is actually related but separate work that also has to be done, in my opinion, around racial consciousness. And I think that it is not, I'll just take it one step further and say that I don't think it is just about how other people see, for lack of a better term, white Jews, but is actually how white Jews are actually also, everything is contextual. So the idea of going out into a space and having having actually a white lens through which is, of course, as social lenses are, they are constructs, but they are still inform our realities and inform the way we see the world, but that we're going out and seeing what we're seeing as normal. Like, I think it really just comes back to this idea of what is normal and understanding that, in fact, many times that is informed, especially in the American context, and it differs in various spaces, but obviously we have colorism and racial issues globally speaking. The United States has obviously a particular history here in which we are all seeing it all the time. I'm working on a project right now about the generation of biracial people after the Loving versus Virginia decision, so people who have one white and one Black parent. And it's really interesting. So it's people who are born from 1965 to 1985. And it's a short series of short documentaries for an online platform. And it's really interesting listening to these kids. Well, they're not kids now, they're my age, but the people who are kids in the 70s and 80s talking about the images that they saw or didn't see of themselves or what Blackness was on television, and how even, in fact, because one of the things it's so interesting, I think, about this group of people of which I am a part of, is that we very much kind of lived on this color line where we had one white parent, had one Black parent, but we're trying to figure out where we fit into and what were the different messages we were given about why, in a sense, white was quote unquote good and Black was quote unquote bad. And the reality is those of us who are part of that generation, those of us who are white, those of us who are Black, we are all getting that feed. We're all getting that information, you know, and so I think we have to get to a place where we can have that conversation, you know, and it's not just about pointing fingers, but we can really have that conversation in a very honest way that we have been fed historically through the media and reinforced all the time images of blackness and whiteness that continues. And when, you know, as a person of color who walks out into this world, you're dealing with it all the time, and you're also dealing with what people would consider the positive things. And honestly, in the Jewish space, I think that that is quite common to be, you know, whether or not you're told that you're articulate or that, oh, like I frequently, you know, I think in a way that I really appreciate when I share my film all around the world, I get a lot of people who share their own personal stories, and a lot of times it's about their one black friend, you know, or something of that sort. So I think it's really this idea of, I think it's in particular when you're looking at, a lot of times it's not just political, but when you're looking at white liberal communities, of which many of us operate within, the idea of why there is still actual racial segregation within these communities, whether or not they are schools or religious institutions or neighborhoods or your jobs, really asking yourself, like, even if you were down for the cause, like, do you live in a space where there are no people of color? And why is that? You know, we know that there are historical reasons. Some of us maybe need more of an education, but how do we reinforce that all the time? And education is a huge, huge part of that. I was just reading something this morning about somebody who I know who had written an article about how they'd grown up in segregated schools, and then the schools integrated, and then all the white people sent their kids to private school. You know, and so, like, obviously for those of us who live, I don't live in an urban environment, but you know, who live in these spaces, it is just reinforced all the time, and it's happening all around us. And then we go into this space, a lot of times I think for Jews, who sometimes we can also feel like we are minorities in spaces. And so we go into our synagogue and we're happy to be around people who are like us. We're happy to be around community centers. And so when there's somebody else, a lot of times we're actually even happy that person is there, but they're different, and there's a curiosity, and they're an exception, and in certain ways they're exotic or whatever it is. So how are we actually pushing ourselves to actually change those norms externally, but also internally about what we think is normal to be Jewish? And that is, listen, I mean, I had to do that work myself. So when I say all of that, I am not, I never am pointing the fingers. I am saying that as somebody who myself had to push myself to expand my idea of, when I look around this room, who is Jewish and who isn't, and why not.
I think that's particularly important, given that, by my calculations, more than half of all Jewish young adults now have a non-Jewish parent. So many of them will have Irish last names, or, you know, clearly non-Jewish last names. And I know that that's not part of your portfolio on the whole Hashem, but for both of you, we also know that there are 1.6 million Christian Jews in America. These are people who grew up in an interfaith home and at least nominally identify their religion as Christianity. Now, we really never pursued this further because maybe it's the religion they don't like, but that's the one that they were raised in. So I was wondering, and by the way, in Jews of color are much, I think I ran some data, but well over half, like 60% of persons with a Jewish parent and a non-Jewish parent who is non-white identify as Christian. Now, this might be because they were alienated, or they didn't feel at home, or their non-Jewish parent didn't feel at home, or didn't feel welcome. So I was wondering if these people have moved so far beyond where we interact with them, or if you do have some experiences with people who were really Jews who were raised in another religion, and almost like the fourth child, like at the Passover Seder, who doesn't know what to ask. Have you encountered these kinds of Jews? Or are they really sort of beyond, or are they on your, hopefully I put them now on your radar, but I'm just sort of curious about that.
I mean, most of the people who I'm interacting with at ICAR have come to ICAR. So there's at least some amount of connectedness. We also have some people of color who come to ICAR who are not Jewish and don't identify as Jewish, but they're, like, they hear me speak in a church and they're really curious and feel like they're looking for a spiritual home, a place that will kind of enliven them and feel like like community for them. And so, but I think that's a little bit different from what you're asking. So, I want to just let me just reflect on that a little bit more.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to say specifically about that either, because it's not really our experience either, in terms of the work that we do. What I will share, though, is, I mean, I'm married to somebody who is not Jewish, and what I will share is just more anecdotally than data-wise, is just like what the experiences are. I mean, I grew up in a synagogue in which I was bat mitzvahed. My husband grew up an hour away from me in a Baptist church. And although I still identify and practice Judaism, he does not. When it comes to being Baptist, we both had a long-term relationship with he with his pastor and myself with my rabbi. And so when it was time for us to get married, again, everybody was geographically conveniently located. We wanted them both to be involved in our service, in our wedding service. And my rabbi wouldn't do it. And it was really, and at the time, he wouldn't do it. I didn't push him on it. It was disappointing, again, because of the personal, I mean, it was so much of it was the personal relationship, the history of it. And at that point I went to, and I know how it's evolved since then, but I went to, at the time I had gone to Amachai, and he was entering JTS, and so he couldn't do it, and I know he's going through an evolution when it comes to kind of intermarriage stuff. And at that point it got down to, it was like my best friend from Hebrew school and like this pastor, and it just felt really unbalanced. And so we actually ended up, and then the pastor had another rabbi he could bring in, but I was like, no, for me it was about the personal relationship. And so we ended up actually having, I sat down with the pastor and I said, again, my husband is not even can identify as being Christian at this point, and I sat down and I said, would he be willing to do the wedding without Jesus being a part of the ceremony? And we sat down, we really worked through it, and he said, you're not looking to have an interfaith wedding. You really are looking to have a wedding that is universalist and actually brings in some Jewish traditions. And he did it, and it was amazing. And I never went until, so I've now been married 7 years, and I just went and sat down with my rabbi, my husband, and I was going to go by myself. My husband said, I want to come because I know that, we're interested in exploring having a relationship. And we sat down with the rabbi and told him how, for us, here we are now with 4-year-old twins, and we are, live in the area, and we are figuring out what does it mean for us to be, potentially a part of the synagogue. But that we have reservations because of the fact that, he wouldn't be involved in our wedding. And what does that mean for our family? And I think, and we had a really long conversation, which he was very humble about, and honestly said that he thinks now it would be different for him. But really talked about the fact that for him, the idea of a family like ours, a couple like us, that when he was growing up, that meant if I was marrying my husband, I was leaving the Jewish community. And that in fact, what he is realizing is that is not the case anymore. That actually families like ours are looking for ways to be included, but also looking for ways to be authentic about who we are in a variety of different ways. And what does that look like? And so we've, and it's still a work in progress, and it's still a conversation to be ongoing. And like anything in life, I embrace that as part of the process, because I don't think that the synagogue or the community is perfect, but we are willing to also do the work of being involved. And so I know I share that story just more to say that I think a lot of times I find in the Jewish space, the idea of I was struck by him sharing what being an interfaith family used to mean versus what it might mean now, and how those things are evolving in terms of who is coming into the community and who wants to be involved in the community. We are a couple that are committed to raising Jewish children. And so, but are we encountering barriers to that? So I think that sometimes how people identify whether or not it is with Christian holidays or actually having a connection to potentially being raised with a Christian parent, I think it's something to look at, but we also have to be careful but to not give it so much weight that we are actually in fact leaving families outside once again.
Okay. Well, when my son was in high school, one of his best friends, they went to a music magnet, and one of his best friends, and a fellow violinist, was black and Jewish. In this case, a Jewish father and a African-American mother. And I actually had a black student who wasn't Jewish in one of my classes. He was engaged to a Jewish woman, and he said, I want to do my term paper on black Jews. I want to see, do you know anybody I could interview? So I called my son, who now was living with the same person as his roommate at college, and said, could, my student interview so-and-so? And my son, Aaron, informed me, so-and-so, he's not black. I said, well, yes, he is. He told me his mother's black. I mean, I've been to their house with you, right? And he said, yeah, but he doesn't think, he's Jewish, he's not black. So you can't interview him. So I was wondering and how this varies in your experience, both of you, by different groups. So in other words, does the black-white binary that's so baked into American society create this kind of dynamic where you're one or the other, and how does that balance? Helen Kim, who's written about Asian Jews, argues that this is much less prevalent among Asians who just fit, Asians are the new Jews anyway, so they seem to fit, in more easily. So I was wondering the extent to which some of these identities are kind of binaries that people sort of fight with or struggle with within themselves, that being one somehow negates the other, or you're one and not the other, and then it's situational. When you're black, you're not really Jewish, and so forth. I wonder if you've encountered that or have any thoughts on that.
Well, identity is internal and external, right? And it's also fluid, and it's evolving, right? So I think that how you may feel at any one moment, first of all, doesn't necessarily also inform how other people see you, is also part of the important part of life. And as obviously you said before, race is a social construct, right? It's not a biological reality. So the idea of how the constructs of race came about and how they continue to exist, and how people see themselves along that racial spectrum, and whether or not people are actually, fundamentally for me, it comes down to the conversations. Are we able to have these healthy conversations? And I think that frequently we're still, again, in that moment of the exoticization of the, especially in the Jewish community, of what it is, and kind of, my synagogue is this, and we have these people who show up, and it's and I think especially because for many identities, so within the Jewish community, right, there's I know lots of people, some of whom are black, some of whom are white, who fundamentally don't always identify as being Jewish because they don't feel like they walk into Jewish spaces and they see themselves, that they relate to it, that they reflect on it. So what are we looking for? Are there ways to kind of have Judaism as part of your life? And obviously this is so much of the work that you do, I think, in terms of inclusivity on many, many different levels. But I think when it comes to race, it's the same thing, right? What does it mean to be, one of the subjects that I interviewed for this project recently, he said he doesn't identify as being black because he grew up with, similar to me, 2 white parents, and the negative images of what it was to be black were so extreme that he couldn't identify as such. And when I asked him, well, what does it mean to be black to you? He said it means you've either grown up with, you've either had very negative, you've been the victim of racism. And he, I should share that he had previously shared with me stories of he had experienced intense racism growing up, being called absolutely horrific things and really, really harassed, and or you've experienced black culture, you have had personal connections to black culture, and so even though he had experienced his racism, he couldn't see himself as part of it. So I think part of it is also are we in situations that don't allow you to see yourself as part of certain people for a variety of different reasons, even if your mother or et cetera, et cetera. So it's very hard, I think, I don't know if there's something to really pull out of those, kind of anecdotes versus as much as the fact is that how are we kind of defining boundaries of what it means to be this or that and how people kind of connect to it and how do we fundamentally, and I know it's tricky, like when, with when we're looking at the numbers and we want to understand how people are identifying. And I've been, as part of this project, also sitting down with the census, some people from the census department, is that, fundamentally also a lot of this is about self-identification. Right, and self-identification, which also can evolve over years, especially as society evolves with it. I mean, even with multiracial issues, obviously, only in the last 20 years have you been able to, on the census, check more than one box. And that's one of the things, like, sorry, just came out, but it's so interesting for me about this project because, biracial people in particular always existed. Who are black and white. I mean, we have a history of it for a variety of different reasons. We were just looking at it different and measuring it differently, and people were growing up in different spaces. The idea of white women raising black children really didn't exist before the civil rights movement in a large way. So I think these are the different things we have to look at in terms of trends and how people identify and how it evolves according to where they are in their lives and what's happening in the country.
Great. So now I'm going to open it up. Steve, do you want? I guess I'll do the questions. And first of all, big round of applause. This was really, and I feel, I know if it's white privilege, but I do feel very privileged that I got to ask you guys a lot of questions first. Mr. Grass, your fellow Harvard Law alum.
I couldn't get past what you said at the beginning, Bruce, about your classmate who helped you through the Mishnah studies and then became a Christian scholar. Our whole discussion has been that Jewishness is a sense of community, and can we open the community to everybody? And Sharon talks about joining a community and not knowing which way to face when they do the Chadadi at the beginning. It's kind of like a community handshake. And as we're talking about being inclusive and letting everybody involved, which is sociology, and that's exactly what we're here today for. But Judaism's also religion, and I can't possibly understand how a person who is raised Orthodox, and I've been fascinated with people who reject the Orthodox movement and go away completely, how he could become a Christian scholar, how his feeling of they won't accept me in this community, so I'm not only going to go to another community, but my gut feeling about what life is all about, what God is all about, changes to include Jesus as the Messiah. And I don't know that you had any contact with him to be able to understand that transformation. And Lacey, I don't know if you had any contact with people who have been shunned from or felt unwelcome in the Jewish community, joined the Christian community, and become, in their hearts, Christians.
I don't think, I don't know from that story, I don't know if we can, I don't know if you have more information, but from that story, I don't know that we can in any way assume that the reason this guy became Christian was because how negative the Jewish piece was. Like, he could have also become atheist. Obviously he had a deep longing for religion in his life, but he also, I'm assuming, found Jesus and felt like that was a particular part of his life. So I don't know if I could make a connection that it is because of like just negative influences. Now his desire to maybe be together. I read this book. You might. I don't remember. This is going to be a horrible story because I don't remember the name of the book. But about this woman who went back and forth from being Jewish to Christian and kind of just wrestling with faith. And I just think if you're like somebody who's deep in faith, it doesn't seem to me, and searching for meaning, it doesn't seem to me that far of a stretch that you might explore different avenues at different times in your life. For me personally, I don't know if we can draw the strong connection to the fact that it's just because the Jewish community was in fact so horrific, but maybe
I think actually in his case it probably was.
Yeah.
But where I went to college, the irony is I didn't know him through Jewish circles. I went to school in Boston. There were 6 students from California and there were 30 from Africa. And they felt about as home in this college as I did. Actually, they were a little older, so they handled it better. So we actually just knew each other through the African Student Organization in college. But Yeah, I mean, it is a painful story, and I think that there are people who certainly have felt pushed away. And as both of you pointed out, it's not necessarily on the basis of religion, of race. It can be on the basis of knowledge. A number of people I've interviewed who were raised in interfaith homes said, it's hard, you take a risk if you tell somebody you're Jewish because they'll assume you know more than you do. And that's a whole other kinds of sensitivities that...
Actually, just to share one really quick thing about that. I mean, I know from my experience personally, and I talk about this a lot, like in particular in college, but I still find this to be the case that, and I'm not saying that every community is kind of, the same. And there are different communities, like there can certainly be Black communities that are not welcoming. But from my experience I went to Georgetown undergrad and at Harvard Law School, that in fact, I frequently had the case when I went to Jewish spaces that people would question whether or not I belonged. When I went to Black spaces, people didn't question that I was Jewish. That in fact, that fundamentally in those spaces within the Black community, the idea of, in fact, our own diversity was more established. That there was people from all different backgrounds that were, in fact, identifying as part of the Black community, and that was, in fact, a more inclusive space to be in. So that fact that you had different backgrounds, that was much more, that it continues to feel much more natural to me. So again, I'm not going to say that no Jewish person who was Black and Jewish ever felt uncomfortable in Black spaces being Jewish. But from my personal experience, and I think for many people, that the Black community understood that there were many people. Now, don't get me wrong. There is there is a default around like just kind of ignoring. Like, for instance, the Congressional Black Caucus gathering this year was on Rosh Hashanah. And I was definitely like, okay, that was, there's definitely spaces like that all the time when I'm going into Black professional spaces where I'm like, oh, they're not even thinking about this. They're not thinking about this being like a Jewish holiday, but.
Great. Dr. Abney.
Thank you. A couple things. One is, Lacey, I just want to say I'm amazed that you're still Jewish after what you've been through. And that says a lot about who you are and how strong your faith is. I think it's very hard to be Black and Jewish on both sides. I'm much older than you. I'm a convert. And when Black people find out that I'm Jewish, it's a rare person that just goes, okay. Usually it's, people want to know why I wanted to do that. It's like, if you're Black and you're not Christian, that's just not supposed to be, it feels like. And if you're a Jew by choice, it's more likely that people are going to associate the fact that you converted to Judaism with the idea that you must think you're white. You're not Black enough. Okay. And, on the other side, I get the usual, like, where are you from? Like, I was somewhere today, and someone said to me, and I knew, because it was all Jewish people there, where it was coming from. She didn't ask anybody else in the room. She asked me, where are you from? And I felt I really got an attitude, because many times people have asked me that, and I say New York. And they go, but no, where are you really from? Like, where's your country? The United States. So it can be hard. I feel like it's really hard on both sides. And I'm more afraid to come out as a Jew with Black people than I am as a Black. Well, I can't not hide the fact that I'm Black, but it's almost an easier experience, maybe because of other life experiences, being the only Black person at school or something like that.
Can I ask a question about that? Because you mentioned earlier this encounter that you had where you didn't ask because you were uncomfortable or maybe didn't want to make him uncomfortable. And I found that in the Jews of color who I come in contact with in my work, it's I mean, we speak about it like it's this monolithic group, and everybody, all Jews of color want to be asked in this certain way or don't ever want to be asked. But it's obviously ridiculous. And some people appreciate when someone comes over and says, you know, hi, tell me your story. How did you land here? And some people feel like, you're not asking the white people that question. Why are you asking me? And I think I think it would be helpful and useful to have a little bit of a sense, maybe for everybody in this room who in some way comes across, is in some way connected to the Jewish community, what is the most sensitive way to say to someone, I'm so glad that you're here and I care about your story, which is something that we do. I mean, we really kind of put people's stories at the center of the communal experience at IKAR. And so, but I know that when you ask somebody who is Ashkenazi, what brings you here, it feels very different than when you ask someone who's Black, what brings you here. It's perceived differently by different people. And so maybe it would be helpful for many of us, if we want to be, you know, welcoming to anybody who walks in the doors, what's the best way to approach somebody?
So we do a lot of work around this with Behold Shown, and we do a lot of workshops and trainings and community organizations and all sorts of different spaces. And the what we do within the workshops is we kind of teach people how to first and foremost to share their own story. And I think that, you know, and that is, I think, fundamentally, like, that's, you know, we obviously have a media background as well, but that's fun, you know, when I'm sharing my story, when I put out the reaction I get when people see my film, and then we use that actually to do workshops around, and we teach people to say, rather than going to somebody and saying, hi, like, even welcome, what is your story? You go and say, hi, welcome, let me tell you about me. And then let me ask you about you. But I'm also sharing who I am, and I'm not making assumptions that, in fact, you also, that first I am sharing with you before I am asking you, in a sense, which frequently does feel like, for anybody, you're asking them to justify why they belong, that you are actually saying, let me share with you my story. And that, in fact, that actually can really increase of the sharing community, the community feeling, that it is a exchange of information from everybody. And that has been very, very effective. And I think that when people feel like they are sharing, that you are sharing your story with them, they feel more comfortable being vulnerable with you as well. And it really can lead to something great.
I saw a disembodied hand way in the back there. Let's see. Oh, we have. Good. Maybe stand up so people can see you.
Okay. There's a demographic that I've just very recently become aware of where inclusivity is going to be important. My hobby is genealogy, and it used to be that on Facebook forums like Tracing the Tribe and such, every so often there'd be somebody writing in who did a DNA test and discovered that they were 25% ethnically Jewish or 16% or whatever it may be. Well, they say that 1 million people bought these kits just over Thanksgiving weekend. It's like every day or every other day on these forums now, somebody is joining and asking and has discovered ethnic Jewish background, and I'm wondering what your experience. I mean, this is sort of new, that this is not just here and there, but I think this flood is going to be increasing, and I'm wondering about your own encounters with people with this kind of background and your ideas about how the community can rise to the occasion of welcoming these people to come in at whenever place is comfortable for them. Some want to explore it as a religion, some just want to understand the tribe, etc.
There's a book, by the way, called Suddenly Jewish, which profiles people who, for one reason or another, found out that they were Jewish. There's also an excellent book by Susan Jacoby, who writes for the New York Times, called Half Jewish, about her quest to about how she discovered her Jewish roots that were hidden from her. So sociologically, I think it tells us a lot about the persistence of Jewish identity as well as the consciousness of Jews in non-Jewish society. But
We also do a lot of work with communities in Europe and in South America and Latin America as well, who obviously were centuries ago were in fact persecuted for being Jewish, and then obviously been hiding, and many people lost their roots who are like refining their roots in whole communities. So we do a lot of work with those communities as well, who feel a connection, and many of whom I'm sure you're familiar with some of these stories of like who didn't understand exactly why their families were doing certain traditions and things like that. And so I think that for us, we just look at it as we look at the idea of global Jewish peoplehood, and that there's so many different narratives within the Jewish experience, and we just have to fundamentally create space for them.
First of all, thank you very much for bringing to the fore, for bringing the topic and discussing this issue. I wanted to share an anecdote that will be different a little bit from what you are talking about. I was born in Israel, and I came here about 52 years ago. And the encounter that I got every time I met, obviously in Israel, I received, Jewish, not Jewish education the way it is defined here, but, I went to Israeli Jewish schools. And the reaction that I got from people when I told them that I'm from Israel, that they assume, Jewish, you don't look Jewish. To the point in which when I went to rent an apartment in the Fairfax area, I knew that I'm being discriminated against because they would not make available the apartments. And when I realized that, because I introduced myself with my heavy accent, that my name is Mrs. Dory, that's what I said, Mrs. Dory, and they won't have any vacancies. And then I said, I think that something about the way I'm introducing myself and all the remarks it says, you don't look Jewish. So I changed my strategy and I said, my name is Rivka. And right away, oh, Rivke! And there were all these apartments available. And I want you to know that these questions and these first experiences here really caused me to go deeper into my Jewish education. And obviously the rest is history, because I ended up, being a Jewish educator and the director of Hebrew Studies at USC. But that was my beginning. So there is also, whatever you are talking about is really very universal. And I could think about such a conversation in Israel among all the people there who are Jewish, but they are so diverse in term of their origin, color, and all of this. But thank you very much. I'm very glad that I came.
Maybe hand the mic right behind you.
Hey, everybody. I'm Tanya Gold. I just wanted to say thank you first. I'm visiting from Tampa, Florida, and we don't have these kind of discussions where I come from. So it's really nice to be here. But you guys gave an amazing talk, and I always say I wish I had these discussions when I was younger. I grew up in the 70s. I am born Jewish, went to yeshiva. My mom is Ashkenazi Jewish, and my dad is from the West Indies, and a lot of other things. He's also Chinese and Scottish, and yes, so we had that discussion too. And he always said, be proud of who you are. Going in yeshiva, they used to make fun of us, saying you don't look Jewish, but he said, you tell them Asian Jews are the most beautiful people in the world. So I was like, all right, Dad, whatever. But I said that, and it's just amazing. Now the conversation has shifted, and I love your answer, because I used to feel like stuck when people would come up to me and say, what are you? Like I was this exotic, animal at the zoo or something. And now I feel like so uplifted and strengthened and empowered to say who I really am and be proud of it. And so my question right now, because I'm also kind of naive in a lot of this information, but can you explain terminology, Jews of color, and on the flip side, what we consider Asian Jews, and then white Jews, are they Jews of no color?
Yeah, Well, first of all, I think that a lot of these ideas are like very, I mean, again, it all has to be looked around this idea of race as a social construct, right? And how we're working through these things. And I think, from my own experience, I can say that I always talk about, growing up in an all-white environment, that we didn't have a race. Like, we didn't necessarily identify as being race. We just didn't have one. And so actually a lot of times, many people do not have I think in this country there are a lot of people who walk around without a race, and then some who walk around with one. And as I don't remember who exactly said this before about Asians, and somebody stood up and was talking about it. Sorry, I'm forgetting. But the idea of kind of like Asian Jews, like how you were talking about Helen Kim and how her work, and especially in the United States, we operate very much in a black and white paradigm. And so there are obviously groups of people that do not fit into that paradigm. And so then it also opens up the question of, like, what does it mean to be of color? These are also obviously nomenclature that changes throughout, time, that there are terms we used to use that we don't, that we do not use anymore, or terms we didn't use and that we do use anymore. So fundamentally, like, what does it really mean? And what it really means to me, because I'm kind of a filmmaker, organizer who's out here really trying to connect with people and connect with the people who obviously in the different disciplines are going to be able to bring you, and I'm sure you can bring in more of, the kind of social sciences around it. But fundamentally, I am personally very interested in self-definition, but I also think that we have to be able to have a conversation around whiteness in this country. And the fact that we don't have one is part of the problem. So I'm actually really interested in the conversation that just really revolves around what is it to be white in this country. And it actually does, in the social construct space, it does in fact exist, right? But then of course, when you push forward, like, can we move beyond it? Can we actually move beyond? Can we become post-racial? Maybe, but we're not going to until we talk about it and we really dig into it. So I don't have any real answers for you around those things. All I know is that we use terms, but we also have to use them understanding that they're loose and somebody else can, like the story, completely define themselves outside of it. And that's, in a sense, their right to do that, with also the understanding that somebody can look at them and think that there's something else. And sometimes the reality, the internal, the external, they don't match up, and it doesn't necessarily matter sometimes to the experiences. So there's for me, you probably will have a different. For me, I'm very interested in self-definition fundamentally. That's my biggest interest. And then I'm also interested in why some people do not self-define certain ways. But that's my personal interest.
That's very sociological. You're to be commended.
I just want to jump in and say one thing, which is we had my daughter had a friend over for Shabbat dinner over Sukkot, and so we were in the back, outside in the back of the house in our sukkah, this little hut that we essentially live in for a week in the fall. And so she's not Jewish, and she was there, and we were doing what we do in the sukkah, singing and eating and singing. And when she went out, at the end of the night when she went to leave, she said to my daughter, and I was standing right there, she said, "You're so lucky that you have all of this." She said, "I'm just white." And I was so struck by it, and I can't stop thinking about it. It's been several months, and I think this is something that we have got to contend with in all of these conversations about identity right now, which is we have a whiteness problem in America. And, in order for it not to manifest as white nationalism, in order for it not to attach itself to white supremacy, which is the mother's milk of this country, we have to learn how to talk about it. And I the other day was speaking with someone who works with social scientists, who's a good friend of some here today, and she was talking about how she's very progressive and sends her kid to the most progressive high school in their city, and they're toying with white nationalism in his very, very progressive high school, private school, because they're starting to feel in this cultural moment and in this political environment. And he's a Jew, by the way, but he identifies as a white person first and foremost right now. And his friends are wearing camouflage now to school, and they're talking in the language of white nationalists. And so there's this growing unease and growing sense that that we have to figure out. There's almost like this void. Like, what are you if you're not a person of color? You're just white. Well, then white needs to mean something, and white needs to mean that I'm not this, I'm not that, and I feel this is a conversation we have to be willing to have as a community. And I keep thinking about Eric Ward from the Southern Poverty Law Center and the amazing work that he's been doing, trying to help us locate anti-Semitism at the heart. He calls it the beating heart of the white nationalist movement. And there is this connection between white supremacy and anti-Semitism, the idea that in some ways Jews are responsible for Black people feeling like they should have some sense of equality and dignity in this country. That is, it sounds, this is like very foreign to many progressives, and for many, there's a reason why when they were out on the streets, they were shouting, "Jews will not replace us" in Charlottesville. Like, that was so confusing for most of us. We're like, what does this have to do with the Jews? I thought this was about Robert E. Lee statues. And so, but there is in the mindset, there's a growing white mindset in America that links Jews and Blacks and many other people of color in this country in a kind of non-white space that I think we have to learn how to speak intelligently about, because now that it's being essentially given the nod of approval from the highest offices, it means more than it meant even a few years ago. It's an empowered movement now, and I think we are kind of out of our we're out of our depths a little bit. We don't even really know what we're talking about or what we're contending with right now with whiteness.
I can't agree with you more. It's like that. I mean, to me, that's, I'm, as I said, I'm so fascinated with the conversation, and really, I think it's important, and I think it, and I think that, you know, within the work that Behola Schoen does, I think it's really important that, again, as I said, we take this from like an empathetic approach, in a sense, where there's a difference between, I think, in particular, obviously, post the presidential election in 2016, that like we kind of held it up and said like, oh, we're just ignoring people, but we have to create, there's a fine line between that we empower, and that in fact we understand that, you know, the way we have to be able to have these conversations, but we have to be able to have them in a way that people can feel vulnerable and comfortable in feeling vulnerable, and talk about like, you know, I am somebody who thinks it's really important for me to talk about my own privilege, you know, my privilege and my blessings and all of these things. Like I always say, the biggest, you know, my family is what my family is, but the biggest privilege I experience is coming from a loving and supportive family, you know. And so what are the privileges we can talk about, that we can share our own experiences, that we can share our own vulnerabilities, that we can share our own questions and our insecurities? Similar to the story, I do a lot of work in all sorts of different ages, and I in particular went and did a residency actually here. I live in New York State, but at Buckley, the independent school in the Valley, and I did work there. I went for a couple days with their diversity program. I did 2 full days of work from K all the way through 12, and in particular, I sat down with like I can't remember if it was the 3rd or 4th grade class, and with those young ages, I'm not sharing my film, but we're talking about self-expression and how do you express yourself through, you know, your writing or your coloring or your art or whatever it is. And we ended up having this conversation where literally the entire class of these like 3rd graders were in tears because they all felt like they didn't belong. They all felt like they didn't have like they couldn't share holidays. So it reminds me of your story, that they felt like they couldn't share their holidays. And we got to a point of saying, would you want to go to somebody else's house exactly for that moment? Would you want to share your tradition with somebody else? Would you like to bring that together? And I think, to me, this even relates back to the interfaith piece of it. Because I think for young people, for so many of us, I know for myself, when it comes to Judaism, going back to what you said before, like, you know, it's not always Jewish institutions on a personal level that I connect back to, but it's the wisdom and the practices in the family. And I am very happy doing my Jewish traditions when I don't care if I'm the only Jewish person of my friends and family in the room. And it's been incredible to see how even my in-laws have really embraced that. And so I think for us, sometimes it's like, how do we find places where these things come together and we actually, again, celebrate our differences, celebrate what we have, but also recognize differences. That's what we're trying to get to, where we can invite people into the room and we can keep our traditions strong, not, you know, water them down, strengthen them, build them, but also share them. And when we get to that place, that becomes something beautiful where it's not exclusive.
Bruce, one more question.
Okay. Steve, I'll let you pick. You're my boss.
Sherry has the mic ready.
Oh, Sherry, okay.
We can be quicker.
A very aggressive Jewish woman grabbed the mic, so we'll let her finish.
A strong Jewish woman.
Strong,
grabbed
yes, there
the
you go.
mic.
Compliment. Thank you, Bruce. So what I want to say is I think that Rivka's point about looking for the apartment, I think that Sharon's point about walking in the door when everyone's looking at her during Lachor Dodi, and I think what happens at Behol Hashan and Alav Shalom, what Gary Tobin started was that ability for us as Jews to say, what are we afraid of? What's making us so nervous here? And there's amazing information at Behol Hashan that I think we could all benefit from, Lacey. And I hope that you'll come back and you'll work with us and teach us, because really we all can learn from this. And we live in this country, and we want to be important in terms of ourselves, and especially in terms of belonging. It's very important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll have, yeah, who's the person?
Our three panelists today. Two footnotes. For those of you on this question of whiteness, the historian in me can't help myself. There is, in fact, a whole literature now 2 decades old on whiteness studies. And if you're interested in that, it basically started with how the Irish became white, how Jews became white, how Eastern Europeans became white, how Italians became white. And I would suggest you start with a book, Matthew Fry Jacobson, called Whiteness of a Different Color. Or just Google whiteness studies. And on a slightly different note, a kind of related cousin note, our next Casden conversation is going to be Why Harry Met Sally, Jewish-Christian Relationships in American Cinema, by one of my former graduate students, Josh Moss from the Cinema School. We wish you all a very... Sure.
Yes.
I'm so sorry. My name's Marissa. I'm a member of VCAR. I just want to say, if you're interested in this topic, there's going to be the Jewish Women's Theater is hosting a night of storytelling. I'm telling a story on January 31st. So 10 days from now, you can just find information at jewishwomenstheater.org, and it's just like the mock type storytelling event where we're going to tell our stories.
So if you couldn't hear, that's January 31st, Jewish Women's Theater. Thank you. A week long.
Jews of color. Yes,
Yeah.
the reason I brought it up is specifically Jews of color telling their stories.
And
Great.
I want to particularly thank ICAR for becoming our new partner and co-sponsoring events. And one of the things that we are doing is we really appreciate how many of you have come from your community to USC. We now have started something called USC Goes to Temple, where with our partners, with ICAR, with Wilshire Boulevard Temple, with Valley Beth Shalom, and with Temple Sinai, we want to bring programming to the temples, to the community. And even though we will be doing some at various temples around town, if you check our website, your emails, you are invited to come wherever we go. You are invited as a guest. Thank you again for coming, and please give our panel a round of applause.
Wonderful to meet you. Up close.